It all started when I decided to go to an unfamiliar place after endless complaints from one of our most annoying customers at the airport. I was in no hurry to return to the office on that boring Tuesday morning. Instead, I decided to stop by an inconspicuous bar restaurant nearby, hoping to enjoy a light lunch and a couple of beers before starting the tedious work of studying contracts. Sitting in a cozy booth and savoring a beer, I reflected on the elusive search for a truly delicious burger in this vast world. Suddenly, my thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of a couple in the restaurant. Watching from afar, I noticed that they sat in a booth opposite mine. The graceful figure of a woman caught my attention. She was wearing a short skirt that accentuated her bowed legs, combined with a tight pink top. Her companion, on the contrary, seemed to be trying too hard to create an image of a cool person, dressed in jeans and a black leather jacket. His slender figure didn't quite complement the whole look, and he was having a hard time maintaining the self-confidence he was trying to portray. My interest in this couple increased when I realized that the woman was Shelley, my sister-in-law, and the man with her was not her husband, my brother Dave. It was obvious that their relationship was not just friendly. They ordered drinks and began to openly demonstrate their affection, kissing passionately in the booth. I was stunned when the man daringly ran his hand over her thigh, hidden under a short skirt. Shelley stopped kissing and leaned her head against the back of the booth, letting out a sigh. The main question was not whether I would act, it was inevitable. The question was, would I be able to restrain myself from venting my anger at both of them right in the restaurant? I've never loved Shelley. I didn't approve when my brother started dating her, and my skepticism only intensified when he quickly fell in love with her and announced 4 months later that they were going to get married. At the age of 23, Dave was too young for such commitments. I was sure that he was completely unaware of the situation he was in, but I had no way to convey this thought to him. To him, Shelley was everything, the moon and the stars. In my eyes, she was a charming, funny, but somewhat shallow and self-centered girl, not as smart and captivating as my brother Dave. She was lively and energetic, qualities that my brother, who loved to have a good time, admired. It seemed to me that they both idolized the same person, Shelley. He did his best to please her, and that was what she wanted. I was pleasantly surprised to see that the first 3 years of their marriage were filled with happiness. But now, watching the scene unfold 30 feet away from me, I realized that those joyful days were in the past. The man she was with put his hand on Shelley's waist and started kissing her neck, signaling a change in their relationship. Shelley's eyes widened in fright when I sat down opposite them and greeted her with a casual, "Well, hello, Shelley, what a pleasant surprise." It was almost comical to watch her reaction as her eyes widened in shock. Her companion quickly took his hands away and turned to face me. Her expression changed from astonished to stunned and then completely shocked. Her jaw dropped, and she froze, staring at me. His face reflected her initial surprise, which then turned into annoyance. Without giving him a chance to speak, I politely asked, "How are you? How's Dave?" Then, turning to her companion and holding out my hand, I introduced myself as Will, Shelley's brother-in-law, her husband's brother. His eyes widened in shock. He sat motionless, completely ignoring my outstretched hand. Shelley began to come to her senses, stammering mid-sentence, trying to explain the situation. "Will, what a pleasant surprise. This is Robbie, he's an old friend of mine," she managed to say before I interrupted her. I couldn't help but notice Robbie's hand at a compromising point, which made me raise an eyebrow in a funny way. "Robbie," I asked, maintaining a friendly smile, "you seem to turn her on very much." Shelley flinched at my remark, clearly hoping that I hadn't been watching their actions. Robbie immediately jumped to his feet, a mixture of embarrassment and panic on his face. I wanted to leave quickly without looking back at Shelley. As I hurried out of the restaurant, I felt anger flare up inside me. How could she treat my brother, who adored her, so disrespectfully? It was clear to me that she was involved with an unworthy man, with his greasy hair and terrible mustache, who looked like Matt Dillon. Shelley looked scared, trying to explain herself. Her face was pale. "Will, I think you misunderstood the situation," she said, her voice trailing off. She didn't know how to finish the sentence. I watched her in silence for a while before I spoke. "You're a terrible liar," I muttered angrily, trying to keep my voice down but unable to hide my rage. "Dave idolizes you, Gives you everything you could want, and still it's not enough for you, is it? Are you hanging out behind his back with nasty guys like that? How long has this been going on? How many others are you involved with? Have you even thought about how Dave will feel when he finds out about all this? She begged me, squeezing my hand tightly. Please, please don't tell him. I'll do anything, but please don't say anything. I stared at her in disbelief. How could she ask me to keep such a big secret from my own brother? Shelley would have to be either incredibly naive or in complete shock to even think about such a request. I carefully pulled my hand away from hers, doubting her motives. Why don't I tell him? I replied. Doesn't he deserve to know the truth about his wife? Her eyes were full of panic as she begged me. Please, Will, don't tell him. It will crush him. I leaned back, intrigued. What was she willing to offer to keep her secret? Shelley hesitated before finally making a decision. Will, if you promise to keep quiet, I'll tell you everything. Your wife cheated on you, she burst into a ringing laugh. This is ridiculous, Shelley. I never thought you'd come up with something so wild. I must pay tribute to your imagination. Shelley looked at me seriously. I'm not kidding, Will. She's been dating a guy from a fitness club for a few weeks now. Her words took me by surprise, but I knew it couldn't be true. My wife and I have been together since our sophomore year at Kenyon College, lived together, and got married after graduation. We've lived 7 happy years of marriage and a total of 10 years together, and all that time, she was completely devoted to me. She was not only reasonable, kind, and caring, but also the most honest person I've ever known, and most importantly, she loved me. I have never doubted either her love for me or my own love for her. When Shelley leaned closer, I realized that she sensed my confusion. I'm being completely honest with you, Will, she said. I'm saying what she shared with me last week. She mentioned another person who was very important to her. I studied her face, trying to sort out my own feelings at that moment. She looked collected and confident. She radiated confidence and competence, unlike a person who comes up with a fantastic and crazy story. It was hard for me to accept her words as the truth. There was some kind of shift in me that made me change my mind. At first, I was hesitant to join a fitness club, while she accepted it wholeheartedly, becoming a devoted member of the club and exercising 3 times a week. Recently, unusual cases began to occur at home when she seemed to deliberately avoid eye contact with me when we were sitting at the dinner table. I felt a little confused. Shelley sat across from me and looked at me expectantly, as if she knew something was wrong. I couldn't accept the idea that I was hiding her affair from Dave, but I didn't want to reveal my secret yet. I needed to find out the truth no matter what. Okay, Shelley, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Maybe we can come to some kind of agreement. I paused, thinking carefully about the situation before continuing. I will not tolerate her cheating on me. If you help me gather evidence, I won't say a word to Dave about what I saw today. She promised she wouldn't see Robbie or anyone else but Dave again, and her face lit up with relief. I swear, Will, I give you my word, she said, but I knew that her promises were empty. What do you want me to do? What is it? She asked. I told her that I wanted to hear all the details of the affair from her own lips. I handed her a dictaphone and told her to invite into her place, give her wine, and make her tell all the juicy details. I needed to know who this guy was, when it all started, and how it ended. I couldn't believe how often she was with him and for what reasons. Why did she find it acceptable to cheat on me with another guy behind my back? As I talked to Shelley, I began to believe in her ridiculous excuse for cheating. It infuriated me. Shelley nodded, saying, Okay, Will, I can arrange it. You'll need to approach her carefully and be sure to tell her about the details of your affair so that it looks like a real intimate conversation, I said, and couldn't resist adding sarcastically, by the way, is Robbie the only one who can get into your pants? He's the only one, she said quickly, blushing, but I didn't believe her. 20 minutes later, as I drove back to the office, I couldn't shake the dark thoughts of Dave's failed marriage and the potential demise of my own. Although I could have assumed that the first thing I would do would be to call Dave and tell him about what Shelley had done, I knew I couldn't bring myself to do it. I've always been a responsible older brother, and Dave is a charismatic and outgoing younger brother who had a string of short-lived girlfriends at school and college. Dave was known for his shyness and ability to strike up a conversation with anyone. A college roommate once jokingly said that Dave could talk a snake. It didn't make much sense, but it accurately reflected Dave's social skills. When Dave met Shelley, everything changed. A confident and charming man who was being chased by women suddenly turned into a schoolboy in love. In just a few months, Shelley had completely charmed Dave. He was determined to marry her, and no one could dissuade him from this. Dave adored Shelley with all his soul, considering her impeccable in every way. I learned my lesson after I assumed that she had made a tactless remark to her mother, and for a week, I felt Dave's anger on me. Knowing that I couldn't discuss anything with him until I had concrete evidence, I understood that he needed to hear the truth directly from Shelley before admitting her infidelity. Despite my desperate desire for Shelley to be faithful, the likelihood of this seemed to decrease with each passing day. I knew that my anger would only increase if I found out that it was all a lie. When I got to my office, I sat down with a notebook and started writing down the necessary steps that I would have to take if the worst-case scenario became reality. This included working with credit cards, selling a house, transferring ownership of a car, and much more. I couldn't stop hoping that I would soon be able to crumple up this piece of paper and throw it away. In the evening, when I returned home for dinner, I found my wife humming merrily in the kitchen, setting the table and greeting me with warm hugs and a kiss. For the past 7 years, I have always looked forward to meeting my beloved wife at the end of the day. When she mentioned during dessert that she was working out at a fitness club, I couldn't help but be wary. Despite my love for her, it was difficult for me to hide my resentment and anger. I knew I'd have to pretend to be an innocent husband for a few days, but it wasn't easy. We had a nice chat over dinner, but I couldn't get rid of the doubts gnawing at me. "Do they give out free ice cream at the club these days?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. She laughed, though there was a hint of embarrassment on her face. "No, dear. I just enjoyed a vigorous workout, then took a refreshing shower and returned home to you, my dear husband. Do you remember those black trousers that you admired a few weeks ago? They were a little tight for me, but now they fit like a glove," she said, her eyes sparkling with love as she looked at me. I couldn't help but admire how beautiful she was and how much she meant to me. It crossed my mind that she might be wrong, but I prayed that it was nothing more than a fleeting doubt and prayed for God's guidance. Despite what was on the court calendar, my marriage really broke up exactly a week later on Tuesday. SH and I had planned everything. I provided her with an inconspicuous dictaphone, which she hid in her living room, and she arranged that we would have lunch together on that fateful day. She took the day off from her non-existent job, and I spent the whole day in my office, pretending to do productive work, but at the same time, I was preoccupied with thoughts about the upcoming conversation between these two women and how it would affect my future. Shelley called at 4:30 p.m. and happily announced, "We're done," and I just went home. I asked, hoping it was a misunderstanding, "Has she discussed this with you?" Shelley responded with a laugh, clearly slightly tipsy. "Oh yes," she said. "I told her about Robbie, and she blurted out everything about Mary, and he looks like a pretty big man." Feeling tense, I said, "Okay, I'll come see you in 20 minutes. When I arrived at Shell's, she met me at the entrance, holding a dictaphone in her hands. "Remember, will you? You made a promise," she reminded me. "Yes, Shelley, he won't hear anything from me," I assured her, "and you mustn't let him know that I recorded her, never. Otherwise, she'll be furious and tell Dave." I just nodded and left. That night was excruciatingly hard for me. I knew I couldn't bring myself to listen to the recording until Anne was asleep. Until then, I had to keep pretending to be a devoted husband. She was still a little tipsy when she admitted that she had spent the day with Shelley, had drunk a lot of wine, and felt very excited. More precisely, she was very excited. After we finished dinner, she willingly led me into the bedroom, teasingly asking if I had something special for her that evening. I hesitated, wondering if I should do it. It occurred to me that this might be the last time we were close, and despite all my hopes, I couldn't shake the fear that she was unfaithful. I followed her into the bedroom, and we engaged in physical intimacy. It didn't feel like making love, especially from my point of view. My emotions were in turmoil, and my thoughts were consumed with worry. She didn't seem to notice my inner turmoil, as she was full of desire and enthusiasm. This experience was bittersweet and pleasant for me, but with a touch of sadness. After that, we lay in each other's arms for a while and then repeated the act. Soon, she fell asleep, snoring softly next to me. I retired to the guest room, closing the door behind me, and listened to the tape, lost in my own thoughts. The initial conversation between Shelley and Ann was light and casual. Shelley made sure that the wine continued to pour and eventually confessed to and about her affair with Robbie, calling him a goat. It was obvious that Ann already knew about the affair, and Shelley just shared the details to win her over. Shelley managed to charm Ann without much effort. She even jokingly admitted that Robbie was not the best because she had a previous boyfriend named Ellis before him. Listening to the vile details didn't bother me too much. I already knew about Shelley's true nature, and open information would only make it easier for Dave to prove that she really betrayed him. I was looking forward to the inevitable moment, straining the desire to skip the recording ahead. In the end, Shelley brought the conversation to an end. "So, honey, now it's your turn to share your story," she said, laughing. "You just mentioned that you met him at the fitness club and described him as well-fed," Shelley said, and her words made my body tense. She laughed. "Oh, he's incredible, definitely the biggest one I've come across." My wife replied, chuckling. She continued, "At first, I didn't even think he would fit, but he came. Oh my God, he came." Both women burst out laughing. I stopped recording and sat down in a chair. My marriage was over. Did I want to keep listening? I thought about letting my lawyer listen to the recording. After thinking about it, I decided to turn on the device again. It's time to tell everything, to reveal the whole truth, to deal with anger and pain, and start deciding what kind of future awaits me. Shelley asked how it all started. The first thing I had to admit was that I never intended to betray Will. Guilt overwhelmed me when I realized how happy we were together. The thought that he would find out about my misdeeds terrified me. My wife began the story. "It looks like I'm suffering from a bad case of BDF disease," she joked, prompting Shelley to ask, "BDF? What is it?" Grinning, she replied, "Let me explain, but first, pour me some more wine. I've been going to the gym for a long time so as not to become flabby and lose interest. Playing sports is such a bore, you know? But a few months ago, a new coach caught my eye. He's not very tall, but those broad shoulders and impressive muscles, it turns me on. Imagine, his name is Marin. He constantly flirts with all the women in the gym, helps them install exercise equipment, helps lift weights, and spies on them during workouts. One day, I caught him in a quiet conversation with Patty Mal Lister, a red-haired beauty I used to work with. I watched their conversation until he disappeared into his office at the back of the gym. A few minutes later, I happened to look back and noticed Patty enter his office unnoticed. I couldn't help but smile to myself. It was obvious what was going on. But I didn't pay much attention to it at the time. When I finished my workout and started changing in the locker room, Patty came in. She seemed to glow with happiness. She had a dreamy expression on her face and a faint smile that radiated both joy and fatigue. I greeted her casually. "Hi Patty, how are you? You look unusually cheerful." Smiling broadly, she replied, "Oh, I have a serious case of BTF." Confused, I asked, "BTF?" She laughed and looked around wearily before answering. She sat down and told the details of her relationship with Marin, describing him as a fantastic sexual partner with great dignity who turns her on very much. She told how he flirted with her and eventually persuaded her to make love in his office. Since then, they had an intimate relationship whenever she managed to visit the club. She said he was amazing and gave her the wildest love experience she had ever met. Although I was interested in her story, I wasn't going to take any action. I can communicate with anyone, but I'm happily married. Despite this, my curiosity about Marin grew over the following weeks. I increasingly responded to his advances and was intrigued by his actions. He would snuggle up to me or touch my shoulder when I was helping me work with the machines. Once when I was doing bench press in an almost empty gym, he stood behind me as if he wanted to pay attention to me. When I raised my head, his shorts were right above my head, exposing an impressive volume. I was shocked by the sight of his bulging like an animal in tight shorts. His knowing smile only fueled my curiosity. Trying to focus on my workout, I almost dropped the barbell on my chest, but squeezed it out to finish the reps. When I finished and put the barbell back on the counter, he took my hand and ran it over his shorts, showing me how much he wanted me. Without hesitating for a second, he lifted me to my feet, checked for witnesses, and took me to his office. And a whirlwind of desire swept through my head. I was in a daze when he closed the door behind us, led me to a chair, and silently took off his shorts, standing in front of me. My thoughts were empty while we were making passionate love. When he finished, I felt exhausted and completely stunned. My wife finished the story, and Shelley's reaction was sincere when she exclaimed, "Wow, that sounds incredible." She nodded, explaining that she continued to date him after that unforgettable day. I left his office in a daze and went to the shower, feeling sleepy and weak. I was completely exhausted. After showering and returning home, I was overcome with guilt. I was shocked that I had betrayed Will, and fear gripped me as I waited for him to return home. Surprisingly, he didn't seem to notice anything special that evening. It was an ordinary evening, and despite his desire for intimacy, I pretended to be tired so as not to betray my infidelity. The next evening, I tried to give my best, hoping to hide my previous deception. For 2 weeks, I avoided the gym, trying to bury the memories of my infidelity. I realized that I couldn't resist the temptation to be with Marin. I tried to convince myself that this was just a one-time occurrence, but as a mature woman with a loving husband, I should be able to resist him. Despite all my efforts, I kept coming back to him, and at first, everything seemed harmless. Marin flirted with me, but I managed to brush him off. It seemed to me that I had already forgotten about him, but a week later, he cornered me at the bench again. The room was empty, and he was holding my hand to his bottom, the wife continued in a dreamy tone. "I can't put it into words, Shelley. Making love to Will is easy, fabulous. We really satisfy each other in every way." I didn't even think about cheating before. She went on to talk about a colleague named Alex, who was charming and flirtatious but never attracted her attention. But meeting Marin was something completely new to her, unlike anything she had experienced before. "I can't believe I'm telling you this now," she laughed. "It's not that Marin is special. I'm not interested in him at all, not as a person, not as a lover, not as anything else. But making love to him is amazing." She laughed again, and Shelley joined her. I sat and listened to them, feeling anger rising in me. I listened to the rest of the conversation on tape, but there wasn't much left. After he slept with her a second time, she gave up and stopped resisting. She met with him 2 or 3 times a week for almost a month. There was no sign that she wanted to stop. Moreover, she noted that lately she had begun to enjoy our intimate moments more, perhaps because her secret turned out to be exciting for her. It was obvious that BTF's desire overshadowed any guilt she might have felt about betraying me, her husband, the man she said she loved and who had always been faithful to her. Despite this, I continued to believe in the sanctity of our marriage vows. After much thought, I finally retired to the guest room at 2:30 a.m. to rest. I'm tired of being around her, sharing a bed with her, and even having conversations with her. Creeping quietly into the bedroom, I packed my clothes for the next day, trying not to disturb her sleep. By 6:30 a.m., I got up and walked out the door, leaving a short and personal note. I headed to the office, trying to hide my anger and disappointment. I quickly made copies of the recording, and by 8:30 a.m., I was already on the phone, focusing on work and trying to forget about the betrayal. My best friend from college worked at a law firm in the city. "Hi Eddie, this is Will. I need a big favor. Could you arrange for me to meet with the coolest divorce lawyer in your office this morning?" There was a pause, and then Eddie's shocked response, "Oh, Will, isn't that you?" After a short conversation, Eddie escorted me to the office of Margaret Adamson, a senior partner known for her intimidating behavior. Eddie warned me that she was really scary. He described her as a person who drives sharks out of the way when swimming in the ocean, and Margaret's behavior and her firm handshake only confirmed this. I felt relieved that she would represent me in court. I turned on a recording of Shelley's conversation with my wife for Margaret. When the recording ended, we sat in silence for a while before she asked, "Okay, what do you want?" I replied, "I want to divorce her for adultery, nothing else." Despite our issues, we must come to a fair agreement on our finances. I will be reasonable about our savings, but I am adamant about keeping the house, I said firmly. As for her name, I will return her maiden name. I don't want her to be called Mrs. Will Harris anymore. Margaret nodded understandingly and looked at me resolutely. I'm really sorry, Will. Could you give Eddie and me a minute to discuss the legal details? After a short conversation, Margaret called me back to the office. The divorce should be simple, and I believe that she will accept your terms without any problems, she assured me. Now, let's start this process. You should know that the recording won't be accepted in court because she didn't know about it. Then she asked, will your sister-in-law, whom you mentioned, confirm her authenticity if necessary? I frowned, explaining the difficult situation surrounding Shelley's betrayal of my brother, her offer to me, and the contents of the recording. I haven't informed my brother about this yet, but I know I have to. He'll be as heartbroken as I am, and I won't be able to hide the truth from him, I said. Actually, I added with a bitter smile, I asked Margaret if she would be willing to handle his divorce as well. She glanced at Eddie and then turned back to me. Let's start by listening to your sister-in-law's statement, she suggested, playing them the tape. After a short discussion, Margaret and Eddie were left alone without me. When they returned to me, Margaret noticed, you have chosen a good pair of wives. Seeing the expression on my face, she quickly added, I'm sorry, Will. I shouldn't have said that. She then explained the situation, noting that the recording would most likely not be accepted in court since Shelley didn't know there was a recording going on. Shelley may have to testify about what was discussed, so it may not have a significant impact. After Ann's lawyer listens to the recording, his options for argument will be limited. In the case of your brother Dave, the recording can be used as evidence because Shelley was aware of it, thus she has no protection, which makes the divorce process simple unless he behaves unreasonably. In addition, we have the opportunity to file a lawsuit against both of them and Marin regarding the situation with the fitness club, suggested Eddie. Most likely, Eddie and I are confident that the club will pay you a significant amount, from 6 figures to 1 and 2 million. The film could be valuable in a civil trial, and they would never want this scandal to become public. Imagine husbands dragging their wives out of the club. Margaret chuckled briefly, but she still looked intimidating. She assured me that she would start the divorce paperwork, and Eddie escorted me out of the office. I'm really sorry, Will. Margaret will make sure that you get what you want. I can promise you that, but I can't help feeling guilty about the situation, Eddie said. I tried to put on a brave face. Don't worry, Eddie. It just means we can spend more time on the tennis court together, I expressed my gratitude to him before I left. The rest of the day was spent in practical matters. I made an appointment with the locksmith to meet at the house at 4:30 p.m. I planned dinner with Dave so I wouldn't be there when she got home. I canceled her credit cards and set up separate accounts for our finances, and finally, I wrote her a note. Although it took me several attempts to get it right, saying goodbye to the love of your life is never easy, especially in such circumstances. When I finally finished the letter, I carefully put it in an envelope, addressed it to my beloved, and took it home. The locksmith finished work around 5:15 p.m., and I was sitting alone in the kitchen, sipping a beer. I quietly pinned the note to the front door, locked it, and left, expecting her to return home between 6 o'clock and 6:30 p.m. I couldn't help but wonder what her reaction would be when she discovered the note or realized that her key was no longer working. Our marriage has come to an end. Now, you are free to continue your relationship with Marin and his big tool. I've changed the locks, so if you need to pick up your stuff, contact my lawyer. Margaret's name and phone number are listed so that you can arrange controlled access to the house in my absence. I won't talk to you anymore. My heart is broken because I deeply loved you and dreamed of growing old together. Unfortunately, our marriage vows didn't mean the same to you as they did to me, the note read. When Dave joined me for dinner, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. After we placed the order, I finally plucked up the courage and said it out loud, and was unfaithful to me. I'm filing for divorce. Dave was visibly shocked, his mouth open in disbelief. Oh my God, Will, are you sure? He quickly realized the stupidity of his question and apologized. While we were eating and drinking, I revealed to him the painful truth about Ann's betrayal. The beer eased the pain, but it helped even more that I shared my heartache with Dave. Sharing my despair with my best friend was very comforting. He provided me with unwavering support, showing that his devotion was undivided. When we finished dinner, I felt compelled to reveal a part of the situation that I had been hiding until now. I told him that it was Shelley who provided me with the evidence by recording a conversation in which the truth was revealed. My brother's sympathetic gaze met mine as he expressed his sympathy, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. He then expressed gratitude that despite the circumstances, he had such a wonderful wife as Shelley. I'm not shocked that she helped you. She's always been partial to you. I understand that you didn't always love her, but she did, he said. I couldn't listen to him praising his wife anymore, and I cut him off mid-sentence. Listen, Dave, please stop. Let me handle the bill, and I need you to come home with me, I said. As we walked towards the house, I noticed a note under the door addressed to me from Anne, written in her elegant handwriting. I casually put the note on the hall table and escorted him to the guest room without daring to look at him. Dave, listen to me. This is very important, I began solemnly. You know that I cherish our friendship and would never hurt you, right? Dave looked at me incredulously, not used to such serious conversations between us. Of course, Will. What's going on? He asked. I suggested that he listen to the recording Shelley had made, insisting that he give her a chance. I started recording from the beginning and pushed the recorder towards him, then left the room without waiting for his reaction. I couldn't stay in the room while he was listening. At first, there was a peaceful silence, broken only by faint voices on the tape. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, and I decided that Dave had dropped something in frustration. I could hear him pacing excitedly as the tape continued to play in the background until finally, everything went quiet. He burst into the kitchen, his eyes blazing wildly as he looked at me accusingly. You're a lying man, he hissed. Dave, I tried to explain, but he interrupted me. You must be enjoying this, monster. To hide the truth about Shelley from me, to let me sing her praises while you knew the true state of affairs with her character. Dave continued, his anger palpable. Dave, it's her fault too, I began, but he interrupted me again. You must be so pleased with yourself. You've always resented her, and now you can gloat and say I told you so for the rest of your days. You're a bastard, he spat. I stood up and raised my voice slightly. Dave, how can you say that? Do you think I'm having a good day right now? I looked at him, and gradually his expression softened. I saw his shoulders slump and his fists unclench. He sat down at the table, looking tired and defeated. I realized that I must have looked the same lately. I'm sorry, Will, he finally said. I understand that you are in pain as well as me, but the thing is, you obviously already knew about it. Why didn't you tell me? Dave, I replied as quietly as I could, you know how you've been with Shelley. You wouldn't believe me. Do you remember how we quarreled when I mentioned what she said to Mom? I found out about Shelley a week ago, and I knew I couldn't tell you. You should have found out for yourself. I received the recording from her only yesterday. Dave and I were sitting together, sipping beer, and I told him the whole story. I started from the moment I noticed Shelley and Robbie in the restaurant, with the tempting deal she offered, to the tape recording and a detailed conversation with Margaret Adamson. Margaret, who was handling my divorce case, assured me that our business is solid and she would be very happy to represent Dave if he so wished. As the evening wore on, we got deeper into the conversation, until eventually, Dave retired to the guest room, having failed to meet Shelley. The phone rang incessantly, but we preferred not to pay attention to it, deciding in the end not to touch it at all. Days turned into weeks, and she kept calling, leaving tearful messages and begging to talk to me. Despite her insistence, I refused to answer her calls. I couldn't find any reason to engage in conversation with her. She even tried to track me down at the workplace, but I asked the secretary to warn me in advance, which allowed me to avoid her every time she came. Several times, I noticed her car parked in front of my house. Without thinking, I just drove by and waited at a safe distance until she drove away. Margaret Adamson diligently completed her assignments, ignoring the drama unfolding in my personal life. The divorce papers were delivered, and she understood the intricacy of the legal tactics that Anne's lawyer was trying to apply. A court date was set. at first and denied any involvement in adultery during conversations with Margaret, but her opinion changed when she provided evidence in the form of a recording. Suddenly, the dispute turned to the issue of the admissibility of the recording. Margaret chose not to react to this feeble refusal. She remained calm as the court date approached, and eventually, Anne's lawyer approached her with an offer to hold a peace conference. The day after listening to the recording, Dave quickly moved from the apartment where he lived with Shelley to my guest room. He watched the room until Shelley left, and then quickly contacted me. Together, we quickly packed up his things and left the place in less than 2 hours. I don't want to look at her. I don't care what she says. I just need to distance myself from her, Dave confessed, his eyes filling with tears as I looked away. Did my understanding of his emotions make it better or worse? Meanwhile, Shelley left a series of furious voice messages filled with expletives at my house. Anne's regretful behavior contrasted with a sense of detachment on my part. I quickly started filtering out the messages, ignoring everything that came from Shelley and her kind. Despite Shelley's persistent attempts to contact Dave through calls and emails, he still did not respond. Margaret took over the leadership of the divorce process, and Dave and I took a back seat, allowing her to take the initiative into her own hands. Surprisingly, the lawsuits with Marin and the fitness club were quickly settled, and the case against Marin came to a standstill when he mysteriously disappeared without a trace. The fitness club, trying to avoid notoriety as Margaret had foreseen, agreed to a settlement agreement in the amount of $1 million. I agreed to keep the details private, and in less than 10 weeks, I received the largest check I had ever seen. My brother was my rock, and I was by his side too. We led a carefree lifestyle, often had dinner together, sometimes attended sports events, and had deep conversations over a beer. Our conversations often revolved around our relationship with Shelley and our life together. There were so many amazing women waiting for us that it was hard to believe, but somehow we managed to support each other through it all. It became clear to me that Dave was not to blame for Shelley's selfishness, she was just a self-centered person. Similarly, Dave assured me that his ex-wife's infidelity did not reflect on me but rather testified to her own problems. Maybe we didn't fully believe each other, but those words were comforting. As it turned out, Dave was the first to go through a divorce. He made it clear that he refused to talk about anything with Shelley, and Margaret took the situation into her own hands. She informed him that Shelley had demanded more money at first, but now that the incriminating tape was in use, she had no reason to negotiate. I accompanied him to the office on the day he needed to sign the papers and found out that Shelley had already signed them. He nodded grimly, shook Margaret's hand in gratitude, and then retired to the men's room. I heard him sobbing behind the closed door when I went to check on him. 3 weeks later, it was my turn. We met on Tuesday, and 2 lawyers attended the meeting. The lawyer representing my wife offered a settlement agreement on the condition that I renounce adultery as a reason for divorce and meet with my wife alone before signing the papers. I informed Margaret that I was ready to meet with her, but I did not want to exclude adultery from the contract. After some negotiations, we came to a compromise. I would listen to my wife, and if she could convince me, we would change the reason for the divorce to irreconcilable differences. Oddly enough, I found myself anticipating what my wife would say. I couldn't imagine leaving without talking to her one last time. Sitting in the conference room in a blue dress that she knew I adored, I couldn't help but notice her short haircut, which suited her very well. Despite her pallor, she was still the same amazing woman I had adored for many years. "This is your meeting," I said calmly, even though my heart was pounding. "Just 2 things, okay? Please refrain from declaring your love for me." Her face turned red, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Will, I'm sorry, but I couldn't keep those words. I messed up everything. It was selfish and careless, and I know I hurt you. It was just a moment of weakness, a stupid impulse. I've thought about it so many times. I wanted to take it all back, but the truth is, I can't. I know I can't fix anything. I can't even be in the same room with you without feeling pain." As we stood on the threshold of our last goodbye, the words she uttered pierced my heart again. I turned away, unable to bear the pain written on her face. I heard her soft sobs behind me, which alarmed me even more. "Baby, it was just a mistake. It didn't mean anything," she whispered, her voice full of regret. My heart sank at the realization of her betrayal. The thought that she might be with someone else tore me apart. "I know I hurt you, but it doesn't change how much I love you," she pleaded, but her words went unheeded. I let her speak. Her sweet voice, which I had always treasured, had now become a painful reminder of what we had lost. When she didn't hear anything unexpected, she couldn't share any new information with me that could make a difference. Eventually, I returned to the table and sat down across from her. "It's important for you to know that I still have strong feelings for you, but our relationship is over," I said quietly. She started crying again. "You have deprived us of the most important thing that connected us, besides our love, the trust between us. How can I be with you again?" I continued. "I was wondering all the time if you were thinking about me or about Marin and his weird gadgets. How could I tell the difference between your love for me and longing for him? How could I continue to live with this uncertainty? I was constantly wondering where you were when you were 10 minutes late coming home or what you were doing on your lunch break. I was afraid that you had found someone else to fill the void." I continued to condemn her while I was waiting for an answer. All she did was cry. In the end, she begged me to give her another chance. What if I met a woman with an impressive physique and had a short affair with her? With someone I didn't particularly love or respect, just someone who gave me physical pleasure that I've never experienced with you, and then you found out the truth. Can you forgive me? Will you be able to survive resentment and betrayal, doubts about your own importance, and the fear that I may not be truly desirable to you?" I asked. When she looked at me with the saddest eyes, I couldn't help but wonder if our relationship could survive such a revelation. After several weeks of reflection, I came to a conclusion. "I can't forgive you," I finished the thought. "The idea of bringing you back causes me irresistible emotions that I know I can't handle. I am not capable of being as brave and strong as you would like me to be in this situation. Therefore, I ask you to do what I cannot, give me the opportunity to improve, to spend my whole life proving my love and remorse." She cried. We sat in silence, not taking our eyes off each other, and it seemed like an eternity had passed while we both thought about the meaning of our relationship and how we got to this difficult moment. I got up from my seat, feeling a mixture of self-hatred and resentment toward her for betraying me and then shifting the blame onto me. Not knowing if I had the opportunity or the desire to continue, I realized that I was not the courageous and resilient person she had counted on. With a heavy heart, I said goodbye to her and lingered at the door to give her the opportunity to talk one last time. Crying and bowing her head, she was silent, unable to utter a word. Margaret was standing and waiting for me at the end of the hallway, her expression surprisingly understanding. "Let her have her differences," I muttered to myself. "It doesn't bother me at all." Dave and I were sitting at the kitchen table, not completely intoxicated but feeling the effects of a few drinks. "Listen," I began. "I've made some decisions." He nodded, encouraging me to continue. "After paying for the services of a lawyer, I have almost $800,000 left. I invested most of it in sound investments, leaving only $50,000 untouched. We saved up a decent amount for retirement but decided to use part of it for a special trip. I've booked a 3-bedroom apartment in Cancun for us for 4 weeks starting from 2 weeks. Let's enjoy the carefree lifestyle. We'll tell the office that you're on vacation, and we'll have fun like 2 bachelors. We can even joke that we are 2 divorced gay men, just for fun," I said, laughing. He raised an eyebrow, and I laughed, looking forward to the adventure ahead. We spent time in Cancun, telling each other about how we were deceived in our relationships. Despite our broken hearts, we managed to have a great time, basking in the sun, playing tennis, swimming, and drinking. Fortunately, we managed to keep each other from falling apart completely. Every day, it became easier for us, and we were less haunted by the recent mental pain. I have to give my brother credit. He was so charismatic and charming, even after Shelley destroyed his self-esteem. He regained his confidence and charm, which made us enjoy the company of many women. His charm worked 75% of the time. When he noticed 2 attractive women sitting together, without hesitation, he led me to their table, smiled charmingly, and said, "I'm sorry, ladies, but I'm sure you won't mind if a stranger buys you a drink. Let me introduce you to my brother, Will Harris." Then it was my turn, more restrained, to politely reply, "Glad to meet you both. This is my brother, Dave Harris." After Dave Harris completed his assignment, he joined the band. Phew, I'm glad it's over. Can we offer you a drink now? By this point, the women were usually smiling or even laughing, and we often ended the evening in female company. Sometimes communication was delayed until the next morning. In Cancun, single women were just as hungry for thrills as we were. About 6 different women had been in my bed in these 4 weeks, and Dave, I suspect, had even more. It was mostly a fun and carefree experience, full of laughter and pleasure. The first few times I had an intimate relationship with a woman, I was a little hesitant and preoccupied with thoughts of her impressive physique, despite the fact that we were miles apart. But the women didn't seem to notice my inner struggle, and as I continued to look for new connections, it became easier for me. Among all these encounters, there was one woman who stood out from the rest, a tall, red-haired Irish woman who was a year younger than me. We spent the evening doing the same things, drinking a little, laughing a lot, going to dinner, dancing, and eventually returning to my house. She was incredibly passionate and responsive, and she wanted to be with me as much as I wanted to be with her. We had a fantastic time together. But early in the morning, around 3 o'clock, everything went differently. For some reason, I woke up and found myself lying in bed, listening to the soft breathing of Shannon, who was sleeping next to me. Thoughts flashed through my head about the wonderful time we spent together, tears streaming down my face from the realization of what had been taken away from me. Without thinking, Shannon knelt down next to me and hugged me, whispering words of comfort. Despite my embarrassment, I couldn't contain my emotions. Shannon continued to comfort me, encouraging me to share my story. As I poured out my heart, the sun began to rise. We moved into the kitchen, where I was making breakfast, while Shannon shared her own story of loss without any infidelity. As her husband focused more and more on his career, their marriage gradually faded away. After almost 2 years of solitude, she found herself back in the bedroom. Without saying a word, we made love. The previous night had been purely physical, but this time, there was a deeper connection between us. Looking into each other's eyes, we spoke tender words and discovered a new level of intimacy. What started as a one-night stand with Shannon turned into 4 unforgettable nights together. When she left after lunch, my brother Dave seemed a little worried about me. "Come on, brother, it's time to meet new girls," he encouraged. "This one was special," I muttered. "I believe you," he replied. "I liked her too, but now she's gone, Will, and we have 10 more days to enjoy it. I'm not ready to stop having fun yet." He took me to the tennis court and then to the pool. In the evening, we talked with 2 secretaries from San Francisco who traveled outside the United States for the first time. That evening, they were relaxing in their separate rooms, but the next day, Barbara came to my room to experience her first intimate encounter on foreign land. Dave and I decided to have dinner at the steakhouse we both liked, remembering how we spent time in Cancun 8 months ago. Although Dave had already settled into a new apartment, we continued to spend a lot of time together. During dinner, Dave discreetly warned me not to turn around, as 2 couples had just been sitting at the other end of the hall. In one of them, Dave recognized a potentially dangerous person. I was grateful for the warning. My heart suddenly started pounding, and I tried to hide my reaction. After a short pause, I happened to glance around the dance floor and saw that she was looking right at me. I smiled warmly and waved at her, and she responded with a gesture. Then I turned back to chat with my brother. "Is this the first time you've seen her since the divorce?" he asked. I nodded, surprised at my own strong reaction. I suspected that the surprise had something to do with it, but I didn't want to know the details. "Just do me a favor," I said. "Let's enjoy dinner without any news about what she does and what she looks like." Will agreed, saying, "Great," and then began telling a humorous story about a flirtatious colleague. While we were sipping coffee and watching the dancers, I felt a hand on my shoulder and heard a familiar voice asking, "How are you?" I got up from my seat and looked into Anne's eyes. Her cheerful expression greeted me. "Hello again," I replied, caught off guard. Again, she offered to dance to remember the good old days, and I gladly agreed. She felt so familiar in my arms, radiating beauty. Memories of happy days came flooding back to me. While we were making small talk about work and the weather, in the end, we fell into a comfortable silence. I had the feeling that I was picking her up again, remembering all our dances together and realizing that now these moments were a thing of the past. When the dance came to an end, she gently pulled back to look into my eyes. "How are you, Will?" "What's the matter?" "What is it?" she asked, expressing concern. I wanted to be truthful, even though I didn't owe her anything. "I think everything is fine." "Some days are better than others," I answered honestly. "Seeing you tonight, dancing with you, is incredibly touching." I was surprised by the intensity of my emotions. She was studying me intently, her expression serious. "There's something wrong with me. I miss you every day. The thought of being in your arms again overwhelms me," she began to say. I couldn't find the words and was silent while the last notes of the music were playing. I was not ready to say goodbye. "Have you ever wondered if you made the right choice, Will?" she asked. "To be honest, I still think about us all the time, but more often than not, I can't help but wonder why I made such a wrong decision." "When I went to see Dave," she asked, "are you sure you're okay, Will?" I sighed. It was surprising but not entirely unexpected. After all, this city is not that big. "Let's run away from here," I asked. And smiled, and we left the place. Soon, we were in a motel where we engaged in intimacy. Afterward, she fell asleep, and I took some incriminating photos. During the trip to the motel, and told me that she got married and is now happy. I was not satisfied. I wanted her to suffer as I suffered. I was lucky. The next day, I found out who Owen's husband was and sent him photos of his girlfriend sleeping in a motel after an intimate session with me. That day, I felt my heartache go away. I came home and hugged my beautiful girlfriend, Shannon. I wasn't going to marry her, we just had a good time together. 3 months later, I found out that Ann's husband had divorced her, and she was in a desperate state when she called me and cursed loudly, accusing me of her divorce. I didn't make excuses and quickly hung up the phone. It was my little revenge on the lying cheater. Story 2. When I walked in the door after work, I found my wife, Andrea, sitting nervously in the kitchen. I asked her what happened, if the kids were okay. Her face twisted in fear as she broke the news. "They're fine, Jeffrey, but I have to tell you something very bad. I'm leaving you to marry James Buchanan. It's not because you've done something, and there's nothing you can do to change my mind. I've packed my clothes, the rest is up to you." My stomach rumbled as I tried to digest the information I had received. Who is this James Buchanan, and what does he have that I don't? "I love him," she confessed, and at that moment, I realized that it was true. We have been in a relationship for a year now. He is the governor's cousin and comes from a wealthier family. My kids and I will move in with him in Greenville, Delaware. "Can you imagine?" she told me. "I had no idea that you had been dating him for a whole year." "I'm in shock," was all I could say. Everything I thought I knew was destroyed. It looks like I was the last to find out about it. I guess I simplified everything by trusting her completely. "His children?" I asked. "Of course not." "How can you even doubt me?" she replied indignantly. "Oh, they're really yours," she repeated once more. She was attractive but not breathtaking, and nothing outstanding in bed, except that she put more effort into pleasing him than she ever did with me. But what's the use? My indignation turned into bitter rage, but I managed to keep my composure. "So, apparently, she got involved with an expensive escort," I concluded. I looked at her, stood up abruptly, and pointed to the door. "Leave my house immediately and don't let the door hit you on the way out, you insidious witch," I said loudly. "Enjoy the joys of life while you can, until he decides to leave you for someone younger," I said with these harsh words. With these harsh words, she threw the envelope on the table and ran out of the room, leaving me in tears. When I went upstairs to rest, I noticed that the children's rooms had been cleaned, and the paintings they proudly displayed had disappeared from the walls. In the weeks that followed, both she and James Buchanan stopped any attempts I made to talk to the children. Only Macy dared to come to me, and we arranged a secret meeting to see each other. I bought 6 phones and gave one to each of the children. Every few weeks, I changed their numbers so that my calls would be less frequent and less suspicious. We were careful with email, sending it only from library computers or from friends' devices. I took the pseudonym Lenny Elmore, inspired by the writer Elmore Leonard, to further hide my identity from my ex. Despite the distance, I managed to keep up with their lives, although not as often as I would like. Macy called regularly, once every 2 days, usually using a friend's phone. The boys visited me once or twice a week, but the situation did not improve over time. I was consumed by anger, pain, and sadness. Andrea remarried to a wealthier man and did not ask for financial support. She didn't ask for anything material, but what she took away was irreplaceable: my 3 children. In some of the stories we come across, there is a scenario in which a woman is offered $1 million for sexual intercourse with a man. As a rule, the focus of attention is on the woman, while it is assumed that most men will do this without any payment. The absurdity of this situation lies in the question of who would actually pay such a large amount of money for pleasure, especially with an ordinary person. Perhaps Buchanan has a huge fortune, which could explain her willingness to accept the offer. It is possible that sincere feelings were involved, but it is difficult to say for sure. The children also avoid communicating with me, perhaps because of the money. Free Ivy League education and the luxury that comes with wealth, cars, clothes, skiing in Aspen, and summers in France seem more attractive to them than simple pleasures like fishing on the Jersey Shore with their father. Despite my disappointment with their choice, I can't entirely blame them for wanting the best of both worlds. I hope that I had raised them to value something more than material goods, but I have to remember that they are still children. The biggest mystery remains why Buchanan became interested in her. She blended into any crowd without standing out in any way. She was average in every way. She got along well with people. However, like many others, most of our friends maintained friendly relations. But now that I was single, there were fewer invitations. Sometimes I was invited to parties, and I had a couple of friends with whom I went fishing, but I felt incredibly lonely without my best friend. I felt like a spoiled product and was thinking about legal action, but my lawyer advised me to refuse, saying that I had no chance or reason to do so. Despite my financial stability, I still felt lonely. The income of $130,000 a year was quite comfortable, but compared to Buchanan's, it seemed insignificant. Despite my initial reluctance, I eventually gave up and tried to move forward. The first year was incredibly difficult. My once cozy house now seemed empty. I hardly took part in the lives of my children and could not even bring myself to start a romantic relationship. It was my daughter who helped me through this difficult period. I was rushing to work to deal with the situation, feeling sorry for myself and drowning in self-pity. Work was the only thing that supported me for almost a year. I was in a vicious circle of despair, feeling as insignificant as a dog mired in its own filth. But after 6 months of such suffering, I made a bold decision. I sold my house and moved into an apartment in the city. I cut back on overtime and finally began to develop ideas that had been swirling in my head for years, ideas that the older generation of managers rejected. It became clear to me that I have a talent for business that far surpasses the incompetence of those who run it. I saw the potential for growth and success to which the current management was blind, stubbornly clinging to outdated business practices that were once successful but now held back the development of the company. It was like riding in a horse-drawn carriage through a bustling city, the only one that stuck to outdated modes of transportation. What could I do but continue to rely on my trusty steed and ignore the advances of modern technology? My attempts to find a job were fruitless until suddenly I got an interview from a company stuck in the past. They wanted me to implement outdated business practices in the company they acquired. Throughout the interview, I emphasized the shortcomings of their approach. I was offered a generous salary to leave my current job at Titanic Incorporated and join the company in Chesterton, Maryland. They were looking forward to my arrival and were ready to offer me a bonus to lure me in. I negotiated a unique package of vacations, most of which took 1 day a week, and a contract that depended on the company's growth and profits. It seemed to be difficult for them to attract talented people, as Chesterton was not the most attractive place to live. Despite its charm, the city was noisy in summer and quiet in winter. I took this opportunity as a chance to start life from scratch and readily accepted the offer. I updated my email address and got a new phone number without telling my ex-wife, although my children were aware of the changes. In the modern digital age, it's hard to really disappear if you live on the internet. I saw it as an opportunity to start my life with a clean slate. My previous employer and wife didn't appreciate me, so I wanted to reinvent myself. I may not have become as rich as Buchanan, but I have succeeded by my own standards. As my business grew, I was able to hire talented people to help us implement our business plan. After a few years, I discovered that I had accumulated considerable capital. This allowed me to work from home more often and delegate everyday tasks to other people. Initially, I rented a place until I found a spacious craftsman-style bungalow with 3 bedrooms and beautiful views conveniently located a short walk from Chesterton. This area is known for the high demand for old historic houses, but you can also find modern houses from the 20s and 30s at reasonable prices. In addition to a collection of woodworking tools worth $20,000 in a heated garage, an elderly man purchased new tools after retirement but never found the time to learn how to use them. I joined the work of the local historical society, offering my time and help, hoping to find a suitable partner. But at the age of 45, the choice of single women aged 35 to 40 was limited, and there were frankly not so many suitable candidates. The level of education of year-round residents varied, while summer visitors tended to be better off than I preferred. One of the members of the historical society asked me to help solve the problem with the electricity on his yacht. I enjoyed the company of this elderly gentleman, and we spent Saturday working on the boat together and fixing various problems. During a short cruise, I discovered a new love for sailing, and he appreciated that he had someone who could keep him company. We agreed on an exchange. I would service the mechanical and electrical aspects of the boat in exchange for sailing lessons. He hired a man who constantly restored and cleaned his boat, and I could take it whenever I wanted, as long as I called first. If it was a day trip, we often went together. I could have bought a boat myself, but I'm economical and didn't want to take on the burden of ownership and maintenance. When I was standing on the pier and changing the oil in the auxiliary engine, I heard a noise. Some kind of boat was trying to dock. I quickly grabbed the boat hook and rushed there, realizing that the tide was against them, and called for the stern rope. The throw was short, but I managed to hook it and pull the stern up to the dock. The pond and the tide helped to push the bow, which allowed me to catch and secure the traction rope. The man behind the wheel, clearly drunk, persistently invited me to join their dinner party at a posh restaurant. I politely declined, not wanting to spend the evening with a noisy group of drunks. But a beautiful woman approached, and Captain Ram invited me to join them for dinner, putting aside all concerns about Wallace. "You saved us," she said. Her appearance said a lot about her. She was sober, without rings on her left hand, pleasant-looking, educated, with a slight British accent, and a body designed for comfort. "Will you join me for dinner?" she repeated the question. Laughter and teasing came from the boat. "Well done, Heather," they teased her from the boat. We were fascinated by each other. Heather, 7 years younger than me, worked in a law office in Washington, D.C., drafting laws and regulations for lobbyists. She was truly stunning. She may not be a Hollywood beauty, but she can definitely stand out in a crowd. During the conversation, I discovered that she and I have similar political views, a common passion for antiques, the ocean, and reading. Although she once struggled with not being able to have children, she eventually came to terms with it. As for me, my own past experiences have made me completely come to terms with this fact. "Heather, I don't want this evening to end. Could you stay at my place? I have a guest room with a secure lock on the door. Although it depends only on you. Do you have a driver's license?" "Give them to me," she asked. I handed them over, and she quickly took a picture of them on her phone and then emailed them. "Well, now if I don't come back safe and sound, my mom will come for me," she joked. "Can you take me to the Waldorf on Sunday night?" she asked. "Sure, but where's the Waldorf?" As we were leaving the restaurant, I noticed that there was no taxi nearby. I waved to a couple of elderly women whom I knew well and who were also about to leave. I asked them if they could give us a ride to the marina where my car was parked. One of them had already arranged blind dates for me twice and was glad that I was interested in Heather. After meeting Grace and Julia, whose name is Lily, they began to playfully tease Heather. Lily began by saying, "She's just a godsend for Chesterton. I've tried to set him up with a few local girls, but none of them are as beautiful as you. If you marry him, you'll have to agree to stay here with us." Grace added, "He cooks well, does well, and earns well, and he's always so kind to the older ladies in town." Heather did not lose her head and replied with her playful joke, "Well, if all the young women in the area have turned him down, maybe I should proceed with caution." "They must know something that I don't," Heather jokingly said. "Or maybe you just appreciate what you have. Jeffrey is rude, but he doesn't need protection," Lily concluded. "Ladies, please, I only met Heather this afternoon. You can scare her away," I jokingly stopped their argument. We didn't have any intimate relationships that weekend, but the next weekend we went on a yacht and had a passionate meeting. As we were both coming out of a period of abstinence, Heather was the exact opposite of my ex-wife in terms of looks. If my ex was short, thin, and blonde, then Heather was almost the same height as me, with a beautiful rounded body and black hair. She had a unique background. Her father was from Avery, England, and her mother was from Madras, India. One of the best things about our relationship was the ability to laugh at each other's jokes. But Heather differed from my ex-wife in some not very pleasant ways. Unlike Andrea, who was ready to try everything she read about or saw in a racy movie, Heather was more restrained and not so adventurous. Heather enjoyed making love, but she was quite reserved. This confused me. She spoke confidently about her desires, but in the bedroom, she seemed indecisive and withdrawn. Despite the fact that she easily managed to reach a climax, she considered such actions as intimate conversations and making love outdoors inappropriate and disrespectful. I was thinking about ending my relationship with her until one cool autumn day. We stopped by Chesterton on Saturday. That evening, I managed to treat her to 2 drinks at the restaurant and then a glass of wine at the house, which helped her relax. Heather, some people find making love disgusting or humiliating, believing that love should be worthy in the bedroom. Personally, I think our role is to satisfy each other's desires, and your pleasure should be my priority and vice versa. I began the conversation. "Jeffrey, don't you like being around me?" "What do you mean?" "What is it?" she asked. "You and I have a passionate and intimate love, and you have succeeded in this. But there's also a desire for a more intense and playful intimate experience that we have yet to explore. I want to indulge in a love game tonight," I replied playfully, without going into details. I will say that our evening ended with a satisfactory climax. It was the first step in teaching her the art of pleasant and fulfilling lovemaking. Every week, weather permitting, we sailed together on the Chesapeake Bay. Often, the weather was so pleasant that we could undress, go out to the water, and enjoy a cold beer, or refreshing swim, and passionate intimacy. We cuddled under a cozy blanket while the boat rocked us gently in our sleep and then woke up to make love in the crisp morning air. It was that autumn that we discovered that we had fallen deeply in love with each other. Despite the fact that Chesterton's lifestyle is far from Washington, we were only an hour and a half away from each other. Closer to winter, she decided to sell her apartment in Waldorf and rent a place in Washington and eventually moved to my place in Chesterton. She has a somewhat flexible schedule. Most weeks, she spends a couple of nights in Washington and the rest with me. I proofread her work, but not so much on the subject of spelling and grammar as on the subject of clarity and completeness. I can't say that I fully understand everything she writes, but at the moment, I can follow her. If I can't, then there's a problem. She is more sociable than I am, but I also like being surrounded by people. We both like to go out with her friends in the city and my friends near home. Life is good. On Sunday morning, she had to go to Washington to prepare for the case for the next few days. To my surprise, the city council meeting I attended on Monday ended earlier than expected. Wanting to surprise her, I drove up to her apartment at around 9:30 a.m., but she wasn't there. I tried to call her, but the phone immediately switched to voicemail. The memory of being caught off guard by my cheating ex-wife made me worry. An hour later, she called me back, explaining that she was on a break, but she would work late into the night. We chatted and found a common language. I was wondering how to find out about her whereabouts when she suddenly informed me, "This week has been pretty chaotic." On Sunday, we discovered that our Chicago office had violated federal truck regulations, so today we all moved to the West End in Fairfax to complete the assignment by 2 o'clock tomorrow. I doubt I'll be able to sleep tonight, but there is also a positive thing. I will be able to return to Chesterton a day earlier, Heather told me. Great! As it turned out, the council meeting ended earlier, and I decided to surprise you. I'm already in the apartment, I happily informed her. Oh, you must be very tired. Stay the night. I'll be back around noon or earlier, and we can have lunch together, Heather offered me. Normally, I would agree, but I'll have to come back in the morning, and you'll be too tired. I'm sorry I missed you, but at least I'll be able to smell you on the sheets when I get into bed. I'll be thinking about you, I replied. Tomorrow, I'll take a long nap in the apartment and come back for a late dinner. I love you, Heather told me. A week later, she confessed, I realized that I needed to turn off my phone more often during meetings or just to focus. I wasn't sure who was calling, so I decided to buy a smartphone specifically for us. We could set it up so that you can track my location and be calm. I don't need to know that. I trust you, I assured her. She grinned and replied, I trust you too, but this phone feature can be useful for other reasons, so she gave me knowledge, a double-edged sword like in the story of Adam and Eve. I checked her location several times but eventually stopped. We enjoyed 7 years of good luck, just like in the Bible. I couldn't believe what was happening when I opened the door one Saturday morning and saw my ex-wife standing there. I was immediately overwhelmed by a wave of emotions and muttered, "You're dead to me," as I closed the door. I realized that Heather had overheard this conversation. She asked, "Who was that?" I reluctantly admitted that it was my ex-wife and described my reaction. At that moment, there was another knock on the door. Heather offered to invite her into the house, but I stood my ground and said that she was not welcome in my house. Heather was upset and insisted that we treat her with kindness because she is a guest. It was clear that she was not all right, otherwise, she would not have come. Heather greeted her with a smile as she opened the door. "My husband mentioned that you are Andrea. It's nice to finally meet you." "I'm Heather," she said. Upon closer inspection, she shuddered. Andrea had always been slim, but now she looked emaciated, with sunken eyes and cheeks. At first, I thought, what did I find in her? And then, I couldn't help but wonder if she was seriously ill. Andrea looked at me wearily and apologized for the intrusion, assuring me that she would not be late. Heather smoothly interjected, "Don't worry about it, we'll stay at home this afternoon." We were thinking of going somewhere, but Jeffrey needed to do some yard work related to watering. Heather said that and looked at me expectantly. I took the hint and went outside, telling them to call me when the coffee was ready. After about 20 minutes, Heather called, "Coffee's ready." I had just finished pouring the last quart of oil into the mower and headed into the house to clean up and have a cup of coffee. I joined them as they were finishing their conversation. I felt a sense of peace come over me. It dawned on me that I had no affection for Andrea. No love, no hate, no meaningful emotions at all. Looking at the two of them, I realized that I would be better off without her. The coffee mugs were empty, symbolizing the end of an era. After all this time, I realized that this was not just a casual visit from Andrea, and I was right. She said her youngest daughter, who is only 7 years old, needs a kidney transplant. The news hit me like a ton of bricks. No, it was an unusual conversation. I knew she had a daughter in Buchanan, but mine? Impossible. I've never seen her. So why don't you take your money and go to Switzerland or somewhere else to sort this out? It's not my problem, I started the conversation. So why are you here? I asked the question. My husband is infertile, and when I handed you the envelope, I anticipated your skepticism. So, I took the DNA results. I didn't have your DNA at hand, but all your children have the same father, Andrea began. She's your children's sister, your own flesh and blood. Unfortunately, we can't find a suitable kidney donor for her because she has complete kidney failure. Jeffrey, the doctors think you might be right for her. I'm not a good fit myself, so I'm asking you to get tested to see if you can save her life by becoming a kidney donor. I am ready to generously reward you for this kindness, Andrea offered, with tears in her eyes. Heather noticed my agitation and intervened, suggesting that we spend some time studying the information received by email and discussing it further before making a decision. She suffers every day, Andrea pleaded. Andrea, please let me talk to Jeffrey. I'll call you in 2 days, I promise, Heather said, looking for one of my business cards in the desk. When Andrea left, I couldn't resist making a sarcastic comment. It's nice to hear that the number of my former children is growing. Please keep me informed if there are any new ones. Be careful on the way back. I closed the door, while Heather continued to talk to Andrea, walking her to her car. I warmed up a cup of coffee in the microwave, outraged at the audacity of this woman flaunting her wealth, and then went to my workshop. Later, I was invited to dinner by Heather, who was extremely worried. Her child is seriously ill, her condition is slowly deteriorating, and the only hope is a favor from a man who despises her. Adding to her troubles is that her marriage is on shaky ground. She began the conversation. That's the end of it. I don't hate her, I just can't stand her. And not because she left me, but because she separated my children from me, I replied threateningly. She thinks it's hard for her to come to terms with the loss of a child. My children may not have died physically, but they may well be dead because they don't take an active part in my life. I have doubts that the children are really mine, but I don't think she would lie about it, I continued indignantly. If they had done a kidney compliance test, we would have found out the truth quickly. We need to learn more about kidney disease, transplantation, and related issues, Heather replied calmly. I didn't make any promises to her, except that I mentioned that I would call her on Tuesday. The child's condition is stable, but not ideal, she continued to insist. I'm here to support you, no matter what happens. After doing a little research on Wikipedia and on the website of the National Kidney Foundation, I learned that a child in need of a kidney transplant may not survive without a new kidney. Due to a shortage of donors, the best chance of success is if the donor is next to the recipient. Although the child may eventually receive a kidney transplant, the waiting period will be difficult, and there is still a risk of kidney failure, she concluded. On Sunday evening, I poured Heather a glass of the special wine that we usually reserve for guests, not what we usually have on the table. I can't stand this woman and would love to get rid of her, leaving her in a difficult situation. And she's still the same as always. If she didn't need me so much, she wouldn't even mention my daughter, I said. But you have to go through with it, you understand that, don't you? Heather asked. What is it exactly? I asked. Put her in a difficult position or give her a kidney? Heather said with a smile. We both laughed, relieving the tension. I hope everything will be fine with the child. I wish your children would take more part in our lives, and you wouldn't have to lose a kidney, but if I had a child, Heather remarked sadly. I am ready to do anything to save her, and I know that you share these feelings. Your decision to donate your kidney to her is a reflection of the strength, courage, and dedication that I saw in you even before our wedding, Heather concluded. While we are overcoming this difficult situation, I cannot help but feel the weight of pain and responsibility on my shoulders, as well as on my daughter's shoulders, I replied. Do you know what I really want? I asked, feeling uncertain. She gently patted my hand and replied with a smile, No, I never thought about it. What do you want? And then it dawned on me that this is a question that I need to answer for myself. After reflecting on my past, I realized that I was so focused on providing for my family and maintaining our home that I didn't cherish the moments I spent with my children until they grew up and left. Now, faced with a daughter I barely knew, I longed to be a part of her life. I wanted to create memories with her, like standing proudly next to her at graduation. I was wondering, they still have proms, don't they? Heather nodded in agreement. I want to raise her the way I would like to raise my older children. That's my wish, I replied. But Jeffrey, do you really want custody? She would never agree to this. Besides, it would be too traumatic for the child, Heather replied. I would like to see Karen on weekends. Maybe it will work. I think she might consider giving us custody, I suggested. It reminded me of the story of Solomon's trial. 2 women were fighting over a baby, and Solomon offered to cut it in half. One woman agreed, and the other renounced her claims, ready to give up the child to save his life. Solomon declared her the true mother. Andrea will do the same, but I want her to deserve it. Jeffrey, you can't do this. You can't use custody as a bargaining chip to donate a kidney. A kidney for a child for a kidney, what are you even thinking about? Heather asked the question. I have so many thoughts in my head right now. You're right, I can't claim custody in exchange for my kidney. The child will receive my kidney unconditionally. But I can't help but think that Andrea shouldn't know about this. Many years ago, I tried my best to get rid of anger, and I succeeded. But meeting Andrea and that hidden child brought it all back, I replied. The memories came flooding back. I also had a desire to get back at Andrea, but I kept it to myself. When talking to Heather that evening, we outlined the details of the deal, and one of Heather's colleagues offered to arrange it in the form of a legally binding document. Just before our trip to Greenville, I inserted an extra page at the end, painstakingly searching for the right font to make everything fit perfectly. On Monday, he organized a family meeting with Andrea, her husband James, and my 3 eldest children. We clarified that Karen should not be present, as it was reasonable. The day before, I went for a tissue analysis, which confirmed that she was my daughter and that I was suitable for kidney donation. At the same time, Heather spent the day with Andrea and the kids, and they got along great. The next day, Heather and I met with the Buchanans. James looked annoyed by the situation. Andrea was visibly worried, and my other children were also concerned, but they all looked quite healthy. After the research, I believe that the Kidney Foundation is a worthy charity, and I want to support them. Looks like you were right, Andrea. Karen is my daughter, and fortunately, I am suitable for the role of a donor for her kidney transplant, I said. But you're asking me to undergo major surgery, remove one of my kidneys, and give it to a stranger, I replied. But she's your daughter, my ex-wife objected. No, she's James and Andrea Buchanan's child, I gestured at them. You all suddenly disappeared from my life without warning, and none of you bothered to mention Karen until it became absolutely necessary. I have a feeling that you will hide Karen from me too as soon as you get what you wanted from me, and the burden of all this will fall on me alone. None of you will experience any consequences or pain. None of you seem to be interested in this situation. I'm sorry, but procreation is not a priority for me, I replied. Deep pain and despair were reflected on Andrea's face. We are ready to do whatever it takes to save her, Andrea replied. I thought for a moment to realize the gravity of the situation. What do you need? What is it? She asked. Well, I have 2 requests. First of all, I want to spend 72 days a year with my daughter. That's 20% of the time she spends with Heather and me. Andrea, do you think that's fair? It will be 2 days off a month for a total of 48 days, plus a week or 2 in the summer, which will be about 15% of the time. That way, I'll have 15% of the time, and you'll have 85%. Does it suit you? I started giving ultimatums. So, you agree that it will be fair? She said, looking at her husband. He shrugged his shoulders and replied, more than fair, I think so too. We agree, she paused, considering the situation. And now think about what I have to go through. A perfectly healthy person gets an incision and an organ is removed to help someone else live. How many of you, in my place, would agree to do what you, forgive me for, raise your hand? The 3 women immediately raised their hands, followed a few seconds later by her 2 sons, and then James hesitantly raised his hand. So, you're all ready to do what you're asked to do? I concluded. When they looked at each other and nodded understandingly, it became clear that this was a mutually beneficial deal that would benefit the Kidney Foundation as well. The plan has been developed. Andrea and I will each donate 1 kidney, 1 to Karen and 1 to the transplant program. After my surgery, James will step forward and donate a kidney to the foundation. In exchange, Karen gets my kidney, and I get custody of her. A 15% time-sharing agreement was proposed, which all parties considered fair. The promise to become heroes in the newspaper served as an additional motivation. James realized the significance of their action. You'll get a lot of approval for this, I said. And what do these merits mean to me? Asked James. You can claim that this is your own idea. You will be even more generous because your donation will go not to relatives but to strangers, I replied. Everyone agreed, they were pleased with this decision, but James didn't look worried. I pushed him. Do you mind, James? He quickly put on the look of a happy man. Of course, it's a noble thing to do, and it will benefit many people. So why not? He answered quickly. Everyone smiled and nodded. Andrea expressed her gratitude. Thank you, Jeffrey. You have no idea how much this means to me, Andrea began, with tears in her eyes. You're wrong, Andrea. I understand how important this is to you, even more than you think, I replied. It was decided that Andrea, James, and I would become kidney donors. Everyone nodded in agreement. So, here's the contract that you all have to sign. There is a penalty clause on the penultimate page. This is my second condition. Andrea and James must put their initials and the date, I continued, stating my terms. James immediately became serious. What is this contract about? James asked incredulously. We are one family. There's no need for that, I tried to answer. I refuse to sign the contract because you annoy me with your pomposity. We can all be considered one family, but there are different family units in our group. My wife and her children make up one family, and Andrea, the children, and I make up another. The concept of family in this context is somewhat confusing. The contracts are beneficial because they clearly state the terms of the agreement in advance, including any penalties, James replied threateningly. If for some reason one of you is unable or unwilling to donate a kidney, Heather and I will take custody of Karen. She will take my last name, and the custody agreement that we all agreed on earlier will be adjusted so that she stays with us 85% of the time, and you stay with us 15%. We will move to this new agreement gradually, but if one of you refuses, then in the spring, Karen will be enrolled in a school in Chesterton. I formulated the terms of the agreement roughly like this. Let's avoid chaos, guys. Just stick to the plan, Heather began consolingly. The agreed result was recognized as fair by all parties. If one of them refuses, I will get custody of one of my 4 children. Andrea was the first to agree, stating, let's not be greedy. Karen's survival was a priority for everyone. Andrea signed the agreement, but James hesitated. Jeff asked about the consequences of not fulfilling the agreement. I calmly replied, Andrea and I will donate the kidneys, and you will do nothing, and Karen will die. When I come out of the operating room and find out that you weren't there, there may be some problems. I received a letter from the Kidney Foundation saying that if I donate 2 kidneys to them, they will give preference to Karen on the transplant list. I promise you that I will do it. What could be better than my word? I replied. Andrea was visibly upset. Please sign this, James. Think about our daughter, Andrea pleaded. James hesitated, not knowing what to do. Andrea interrupted him, just sign it. There's no need to finish this thought. James silently signed the contract. A week later, Andrea underwent surgery, and as soon as the surgeon took a break and changed his clothes, they began to operate on me. When I woke up from anesthesia in the intensive care unit, I was transferred to a separate hospital room. Heather was next to me in the intensive care unit, but as soon as I was in a private room, she and Macy came in to chat. Heather told me about Andrea's condition and assured me that the doctor said I was fine. Maisie met my gaze and expressed regret that James and Andrea were trying to make me look bad. Dad, it was like we were part of some kind of almost cult mentality. It seemed that we were sacrificing ourselves for the sake of the future. Looking back now, it seems silly, but we were just kids. James and Mom were in their own world, Macy said, starting to cry. I would like to hug you and comfort you, but I can't right now, I replied. But Heather was there, she hugged Macy. We forgive you, and so does Dad. You were just a kid then, and you tried your best. Let's focus on the future, Heather said comfortingly. Jeffrey, I want you to become an important part of our lives, my son Mike said as he entered the room. It's good that you're awake. I also decided to donate a kidney. I signed up for this while you were under anesthesia. Unfortunately, James refused and postponed it indefinitely, but it is unlikely that it will ever happen, my son said. God, Mike, I'm not sure this is a wise decision. You have a whole future ahead of you, I replied. I'm not sure you don't have to do this, you know. The job is already done. Your donated kidney doesn't absolve Jamie of responsibility. That's not why my decision was made, I replied. Karen's move to us is definitely a positive moment. I believe it will be good for her. I promised to do it because my parents did the same, and it was the right thing to do. Seeing Karen suffer was hard, but I heard that my kidney could potentially help 2 people. Dad, you were right about Jamie. He didn't agree. He really doesn't like being called Jimmy. We got in trouble for calling him that, Mike said. Heather looked at me, and it dawned on her when she realized how I had organized the situation. I had a feeling that he wouldn't give up so easily, but I couldn't bring myself to admit it. Instead, I decided that he would be the main culprit for Andrea losing her daughter. I never really knew Jimmy, having first met him just a week ago. He seemed to me a little clamped down and out of place among us. It was clear that he didn't belong to us, especially now that he was gone. But who was he really to me? Despite this, I had the feeling that he cared about you in his own way. This week marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, especially when we started spending weekends with Karen. One of her siblings accompanied her on the trip, and sometimes they both stayed all day, returning home only late at night on Sundays. Either my wife or I drove her back. In the end, we started inviting both Karen and her sister for the whole weekend. Since everything went smoothly, we extended their visit from Thursday evening to Sunday evening. Taking a friend's boat at our disposal, we spent the summer yachting, fishing, and swimming. We even took Karen and her sister on vacation to Washington, after which we made a similar trip with the boys. We decided to extend our trips by an extra day because the kids were so passionate about the Smithsonian Museum that we couldn't tear them away. At the end of the summer, Andrea came to see Karen, and we started talking. Andrea looked as calm and contented as I'd ever seen her. Heather kindly gave us time to talk in private. Andrea confessed to me about her strained relationship with James, which was news to me. On the other hand, Heather and I are fine. Maybe you should talk to her about it. It seems that in the past, you both did something right since the children turned out to be good, although James did not take much part in their upbringing, Heather suggested to me. He looked more like an older friend than a father, don't you think? I asked Andrea. I understand how hard it was for you and those who tried to help, Andrea said. As far as I've noticed, he doesn't seem to appreciate hard work and self-sacrifice. I suppose if you have enough money, you can afford to waste time on an empty activity, I replied. Were you trying to drive a wedge between us? She asked. Andrea, when you left me, you didn't give a damn about my feelings. And now, I don't think about you at all. I just wanted Karen to have a normal life like you, and for my children to come back into my life, I replied sadly. I was ready to share, but I was deeply outraged that you didn't do the same. It bothered me more than the divorce, but now it's all in the past. I've come to terms with it, Andrea said. So what's your problem with him? I asked the question. I feel betrayed. I lost Karen, my child, and now he's cheating on me, Andrea said quietly. I almost choked, but then I couldn't help but laugh when I saw the look on her face. I burst out laughing. You're a hypocrite. You were perfectly content when you cheated on me, your husband, and hid him from me and the children, weren't you? I asked angrily. Do you really think that I will sympathize with you? In the end, everything has to be fair, I said. I understand how you feel, and I agree that no one should give up a child. Maybe it's time to start looking for a good divorce lawyer. Will you still be rich after all is said and done, or have you signed a prenuptial agreement? I asked with a laugh. She couldn't help but laugh with me. Jeffrey, you will never stop making me laugh, she replied, with tears in her eyes. Yes, justice has been served, but from my point of view, it is not very pleasant. There is a prenuptial agreement, but financially I will still benefit, Andrea replied. But happiness is a completely different story. You'll have to figure that out on your own. It looks like you missed an important life lesson, I said sadly. It is very important to understand what brings you joy and find a partner who will support and encourage your happiness. You must decide on your desires and take the necessary steps to achieve them. If James is not right for you, don't be afraid to move on and develop a plan to get out of the relationship. Remember what you did before, start searching, and when you meet a person who will support you during the divorce process, think about ending your relationship with your current spouse and getting married for the third time. You're still young and fashionable, financially stable, and you love sports like golf and tennis. I began to cheer her up, looking for advice on how to improve your personal life. Call Heather. She's been through all this and knows how to deal with it after her husband left her. She did something that helped her. She will definitely be able to understand your situation better than I do. I finished giving advice. Andrea left in the afternoon, and later, Heather, Karen, and I went into town for dinner that night. As we lay in bed, I told Heather about our conversation. She couldn't help but laugh when I mentioned that James treated her the same way she treated me. It wasn't very pleasant, she said, stifling a laugh. Do you think she was trying to flirt with you? Heather asked. That's such an outdated expression, isn't it, to flirt with me? I laughed. Don't be silly. She sees how happy we are, how much we love each other. I told her to talk to you because we're fine after the divorce. I don't care what she thinks. I made it clear how much I love you. I interrupted Heather's sad thoughts. Heather and I had a great time that night without waking Karen up. As a result, Andrea moved to Florida and invited us all there for Thanksgiving. She ordered dinner, but it was terrible according to our arrangements. The children took turns spending Christmas and New Year with us. We always went to a big 4th of July picnic in Chesterton. The children kept in touch with James, who provided for them financially. Personally, I've only seen James twice, at Macy's wedding and Michael's wedding. When Jason and Edward got married, we held a ceremony in Chesterton, but James did not respond to the invitation. To his credit, he did send them a check a few weeks later. Andrea spent a fortune on cosmetic surgery in an attempt to preserve her appearance. Despite this, surgery has not been able to change her inner world. Over time, she became embittered and envious. The children decided that she would come to them for the holidays in turn so that none of them would have to endure her company too often. It is rumored that she has had many romantic partners over the years. Story 3. It was a happy period of life for us. My family and I are doing well. On the way home, I received an unexpected message from Linda. She shared how much she enjoyed our time together and offered to repeat it the next time I have to leave for work. She also mentioned that she didn't want to wake up next to someone else and that she would miss our daily intimacy. Shocked by her words, I stopped to read the message again, realizing that this was not a mistake. I answered briefly, "Find a lawyer," referring to our prenuptial agreement. I thought she would agree to have only one lawyer mediate our divorce. Throwing my phone on the seat, I drove home, ignoring her attempts to call and text me. When I entered the house, I heard her talking on the phone with a man about our situation. She didn't realize I was home until I told her, "Honey, I'm home." Shock showed on her face. She dropped the phone in horror. "Are you talking to a lawyer?" I asked. She tried to convince me that it was all a joke, but I didn't believe her. Going into the bedroom, I took off the bed linen and packed it in black plastic bags. Despite Linda's tears and her assurances that it was a hoax, I was not convinced. The betrayal was too painful to ignore, and I knew I needed to act to move on. While collecting the bed linen, I realized that I needed 2 bags because the plaid did not fit together with the sheets and blanket. Ignoring Linda's pleas, I carried the bags to the car and threw them in the trunk. I suspected that this was the bedding she had been using with another guy over the past week, possibly leaving evidence of their affair. I didn't really need proof, but I left the laundry just in case. When I returned to the house, Linda rushed to me, begging for forgiveness and claiming that it was all a joke. I told her that it was a cruel joke and that we would discuss everything only in the presence of a lawyer. I gave her one chance to justify herself before telling her that I sent the laundry to the laboratory for analysis. The truth would come out sooner or later, and I was ready for it. She didn't say much, just nodded in agreement. I exclaimed, discovering that it was Richard. My shock was palpable. He was my friend. There was an awkward silence in the room. Breaking it, I asked if she had a place to live, but she looked puzzled. I made it clear to her that she would no longer stay in my house. "Pack your things and go to your parents. Your things will be sent to you," I informed her sternly. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I had to repeat to her, "No, no, no," while she tried to repeat that she loved me and that it didn't mean anything. I knew I had to force her to make a decision, and I gave her an ultimatum. She could pack up and leave on her own, or I'd take her and her stuff out into the yard. It was my family's house, which came to me when my parents moved to a warmer climate. Linda didn't have any rights to this house. To make sure that I was acting within my rights, I called my father and explained the situation. After he finished swearing, he asked how he could help. I asked him to write to my wife and ask her to vacate the house. She could have resisted and forced us to go through the eviction process, but she knew it wasn't in her best interests. Linda packed up her things and started looking for her car key in the garage. I couldn't find my phone because I took it out of Linda's purse when I was packing. The problem with Linda is her laziness. When we went to buy a car, she refused to help with the paperwork, which resulted in both cars being in my name. Considering her cheating, I decided not to let her take one of the cars. In addition, payments for both cars were debited from my personal bank account. I met with her and made it clear that both cars were registered in my name, suggesting that she call her parents or take an Uber. Linda went berserk and started yelling at me, accusing me of rudeness. I stood my ground and warned her not to test my patience. She backed away, and I demanded her phone. She hesitated, but I reminded her that I had proof of purchase of the phone on my credit card. I offered her an old phone from her desk drawer and suggested she get her own phone line, since I was once again the only one who signed a contract with T-Mobile. Reluctantly, she handed over the phone and took the old one from the drawer. I will find out a lot of information about this novel later because, as I expected, Linda was lazy and always used one of the 3 passwords. This time it was just the 4 digits of her year of birth. After escorting her out, I stood at the door until her parents arrived. When they got out of the car, Linda burst into tears again and began to seek comfort from her mother. Her father came up to me with a serious expression on his face and asked about the situation. I took out my phone and showed him the message she sent me. His face paled as he read it, and he nodded apologetically. After they left and Linda's things were packed, this was the last conversation I had with my now ex-wife. It was only at the end of that week that we met at the lawyer's office for mediation. It was my second marriage, and after the turmoil of the first one, I made it clear to Linda at the very beginning of our relationship that I would never remarry without a prenuptial agreement. She seemed indifferent, but she didn't mind the idea because it was fair. We just divided our joint banking assets equally and agreed that each of us would be responsible for our credit cards and debts in our own name. We didn't have any cards in common, and most of the debt was in my account, since Linda only used hers for social outings with friends to places like Starbucks. The prenuptial agreement also stated that in the event of a divorce, there would be no alimony or access to each other's pension funds. This is just a simplified version of the agreement. The intermediary lawyer we hired carefully examined all our assets and their value during the divorce process. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement, Linda received half of our bank funds, including savings. She was allowed to keep everything she bought with her credit card, although most of the large purchases were made with my card, including most of her jewelry. I didn't challenge her decision because I didn't need these things. In addition, I allowed her to choose any furniture she wanted to keep. Despite Linda's attempts to communicate with me, I refused to engage in any discussions. The betrayal associated with her full-blown affair was too strong to overcome. Fortunately, Linda's medical history did not allow us to have children, as she had several miscarriages due to a scar on the uterus formed after a previous abortion. After an emotional struggle with losses, we decided to stop trying to conceive a child. Our divorce was quick and drama-free, thanks to the prenuptial agreement and the mediator. It lasted 6 months, mainly because of the mandatory waiting period. Although I'm not a Hollywood hunk at 30, I'm still in decent shape. My wife was attractive, but the lack of motivation was starting to make itself felt. Surprisingly, I found her gentleness attractive, as did her partner in the novel. I'm sure it won't be difficult for her to find someone new. I never found out what happened to her partner. Linda claimed that they broke up because she confessed her love to me during a heated argument. I suspect she was telling him a very different story, which led to his decision to leave. Have I forgiven Richard? No. After the divorce, I met him at his house and informed him that I had divorced the woman he was involved with. It's time for him to face the consequences. I explained to him that although it hurt me when my wife cheated on me, I would not be able to forgive my friend's betrayal. I've been preparing for this confrontation for 6 months. In the past, I couldn't stand up for myself when I lost love, but this time I was ready. He yelled at me, accusing me of ruining his relationship with Linda, and tried to attack me. In self-defense, I punched him in the nose, knocking him down. I kept hitting him, tears streaming down my face with every punch. After months of pent-up frustration and anger, I finally stood up for myself. I watched as emotions overwhelmed me, unable to contain the anger that surged within. I kept hitting him until he lost consciousness. After sitting next to his motionless body for a few minutes, I finally dialed 911. The ambulance arrived quickly and took him to the hospital. I ended up in handcuffs and was taken to the police station. Surprisingly, I was released in the evening, as Richard did not press charges. The next day, a short message from Richard said, "We're even." That's how this chapter in my life ended. Despite the appearance of indifference, I was deeply worried about Linda. The pain of the situation weighed heavily on me. Because I had already gone through a divorce at the age of 20, I didn't plan for the third one. I wish all the best to those who go through similar trials, and remember that a prenuptial agreement can be considered an equalizer. According to my lawyer, they are more common than you might think. At our son's birthday party, my wife Jennifer betrayed me by cheating on me with an animator. That day, I realized the true value of normality as life plunged me into a world of absurdity. Even a simple pirate-themed holiday could be a reason for such unexpected events. After seeing my soulmate in the arms of another, I was forced to face the harsh reality of infidelity at what seemed like an innocent party. Our son David was completely fascinated by the Pirates Plunder game room with a pirate theme, and on his 6th birthday, he made one simple wish: to have a Pirates Plunder-style party. Jennifer and I were happy to bring it to life. The venue was amazing, in a large arcade with themed party rooms and 2 mascots, the pirate Captain Cutlass and the friendly shark Scaly Whack. All the children liked them, especially David. The day of the party turned out to be sunny and joyful. Jennifer did her best to prepare a party full of excitement and anticipation. Pirate-themed invitations, skull and crossbones balloons, and a treasure chest cake decorated the room, while children ran around earning tickets and competing on slot machines. Laughter and fun filled the air, while David was having fun and Jennifer's eyes sparkled as she watched him play. As the party went on, I couldn't help but notice something strange. Captain Cutlass, the huge mascot, seemed more interested in Jennifer than in the children. They laughed together, posed for photos, and had a playful altercation. At first, I treated it as part of the celebration, but as they continued to interact, it seemed less and less innocent. Even though I tried not to pay attention to it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Betrayal, anger, and resentment bubbled up inside me as I tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Jennifer's voice shouting my name followed me as I ran out of the building, and my head was spinning with thoughts of how long this affair had been going on. I knew I couldn't stay in this moment any longer. I needed space to think about what had happened. Finding a quiet place under the nearest tree, I sat down and let my tears flow. My world was destroyed in an instant, and I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. When the sun started to set and the noise of the party faded into the background, I made a decision. I couldn't ignore what I saw, but I couldn't look Jennifer in the eye yet. I needed time to heal and figure out what to do next. With a heavy heart, I got up and left, leaving behind the chaos of the party and the painful image of Jennifer in the arms of Captain Cutlass. We put fake smiles on our faces, determined not to let personal problems overshadow our son's special day. When we cut the cake, sang, and laughed, the joy seemed empty and forced. After the party was over and we loaded everything into the car, there was a suffocating silence between us. It wasn't until we got home that we finally started talking. David was lying in bed, his face still smeared with birthday cake. Jennifer tried to explain herself, but her words were ignored as she spoke. Cold anger boiled inside me, every word a painful reminder of her betrayal. "It was just a mistake," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "A mistake? You don't cheat on your husband by accident with a pirate mascot," I replied sharply, the sound of my voice filling the empty house, reverberating from the pain in my heart. "I don't know what I was thinking." "Forgive me, Chris," she cried, her eyes begging for forgiveness. I wanted to believe her, but the trust was destroyed. I wanted to hold her close and forget about everything, but the image of her with Captain Cutlass continued to haunt me. "Regret won't help, Jennifer," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You broke us. You've ruined our family. I've ruined everything. I've messed up everything, Chris," she cried. "I know. Please, let's talk for David's sake." But I was no longer able to reconcile. The woman I once loved, the mother of my child, betrayed our vows and our family. Not trusting myself to make rash decisions, I realized that I needed space. "We'll talk tomorrow, Jennifer," I announced with finality. "I'll be in the guest room tonight." Jennifer nodded, tears still streaming down her cheeks. I left her in the living room, and her sobs echoed in the empty house, painfully recalling the events of that day. That night, as I lay in the guest bed, thoughts full of confusion and anger spun in my head, and I could not find peace. I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The events of that day kept popping up in my head, the image of Jennifer in the arms of the mascot, the feeling of betrayal that did not leave me. Despite the pain it caused, I knew what needed to be done. The next morning, I found Jennifer in the kitchen, with swollen, tear-stained eyes. David was sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the commotion between his parents. After I cleaned myself up, I took a deep breath and said the words I never thought I would say. "Jennifer, I think it's time for a divorce." The words froze in the air, hanging over us like a guillotine, unchanging and oppressive. Jennifer's eyes widened, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the silence was broken by the noise of the morning, a mournful reminder that the happiness in our home was now destroyed. Life, as it turned out, was unpredictable, with surprises like pirate mascots at a children's party. As I set off on this unfamiliar journey, memories of the joy and innocence of the past day flashed through my mind. Celebrating a child's birthday was the spark for a deep realization that changed my life forever. As I mourned the end of my marriage, I realized that this was just the beginning of a difficult path. It would be a path of self-discovery, healing, and, most importantly, protecting my son David from the consequences of our unfortunate S. When the divorce was over, my son David stayed with me. The court decided that a mother who cheats on her husband at her own son's birthday party is not able to have a good influence on the child.